Imagine yourself standing at the foot of the cross, witnessing one of the most extraordinary moments in history. Jesus of Nazareth, a man whose words had moved mountains, whose hands had healed the sick, and whose very presence brought hope to thousands, has just died. But his death was only the beginning of something far greater, far more powerful than anyone could have imagined. Today, we're diving deep into 5 remarkable events that happened immediately after Jesus took his last breath on the cross. Each of these events is rich with meaning and mystery, and together, they reveal a story of divine power and hope. So stay with us as we explore these extraordinary happenings. First, let's talk about something absolutely astonishing: the tearing of the temple veil. Now, for a bit of context, the temple in Jerusalem was the center of Jewish religious life. It wasn't just any ordinary building. It was divided into sections, and at its heart was a place called the Holy of Holies. This was the innermost, most sacred space in the temple where it was believed that God's presence dwelled. The Holy of Holies was separated from the rest of the temple by a massive, thick curtain, a veil. This veil wasn't just a piece of fabric. It was said to be as thick as a man's hand, nearly impossible to tear, and it symbolized the separation between God and humanity. But when Jesus died, something unthinkable happened. At the exact moment of his death, this heavy veil was torn in two, from top to bottom. Imagine that, a curtain, which was around 60 feet high and incredibly strong, suddenly ripping from the top down. This was no accident. It wasn't something that could be explained by mere human hands or natural forces. Many believe this act symbolized that the barrier between God and humanity had been removed. Through Jesus' sacrifice, we now have direct access to God, without the need for priests or sacrifices. It was a divine declaration that a new covenant had begun, one where every person could approach God personally. Think about what that must have felt like to those present at the time, priests, believers, and skeptics alike. It was a profound shift in understanding and relationship with God. Moving on to the second extraordinary event, the earthquake and the opening of tombs. Now, earthquakes were not unknown in that region, but this was something different. As Jesus took his last breath, the earth shook with such intensity that rocks were split apart. The people in Jerusalem must have been terrified. And it wasn't just the shaking ground that frightened them, something even more miraculous happened. Tombs opened, and the dead were raised to life. Imagine seeing graves suddenly exposed, and then, even more astonishingly, seeing people who had passed away walk among the living. According to the Gospel of Matthew, many righteous people who had died were raised to life, and they went into the holy city and appeared to many. This wasn't a quiet event hidden in the shadows, this was a public display that shook Jerusalem to its core. Can you picture the impact this would have had? Loved ones returned, people who had once died now walking the streets. It would have felt like a foretaste of something far greater. It was a physical manifestation of the resurrection power that would soon be fully revealed in Jesus himself. Now, let's move to our third significant event. This one is particularly fascinating because it involves a man who was, in many ways, an outsider. A Roman centurion, one of the very soldiers who was present at Jesus' crucifixion. This centurion would have been a hardened soldier, experienced in the brutal realities of Roman executions. He had likely seen dozens, if not hundreds, of men die on a cross. Yet, something about Jesus' death moved him deeply. As the earth shook and the sky darkened, he looked up at Jesus and said, "Truly, this was the Son of God." Can you imagine that moment? This was a man whose job was to enforce the law of the empire, a man loyal to Rome. And yet, in this singular moment, he recognized something divine in Jesus. His declaration wasn't whispered or muttered, it was a powerful testimony, heard by all around him. This moment signaled that Jesus' impact extended beyond his followers, even those who were meant to oppose him could not deny his divinity. The centurion's proclamation would have resonated powerfully with those who heard it, showing that even in death, Jesus was transforming hearts and lives. The fourth event is the burial of Jesus, and it involves a man named Joseph of Arimathea. Joseph was a wealthy man, a member of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish council that had played a role in condemning Jesus. Yet, he was also a follower of Jesus. When Jesus died, many of his disciples had scattered, frightened and uncertain. But Joseph of Arimathea took a bold step. He went to Pilate, the Roman governor, and requested Jesus' body. This was a dangerous move for Joseph. He was aligning himself with a man who had just been executed as a criminal. Pilate granted his request, and Joseph lovingly wrapped Jesus' body in linen and placed it in his own new tomb. The tomb was sealed with a large stone, marking what appeared to be the end. But Joseph's act of devotion showed that even in death, Jesus' followers remained committed to honoring him. Joseph's courage and love for Jesus were a powerful testament of faith during this dark time. His actions remind us that faith isn't just about words. Sometimes, it's about taking bold, visible steps even when the future is uncertain. And now, we come to the final, and perhaps the most important event, the resurrection of Jesus. 3 days after his death, Mary Magdalene and other followers went to the tomb, expecting to find a sealed grave. Instead, they discovered that the stone had been rolled away, and the tomb was empty. Then, the unimaginable happened. Jesus appeared to them, alive. His resurrection wasn't just an event, it was the foundation of Christian faith, a victory over sin and death. It was proof that Jesus was who he claimed to be, the Son of God, the Messiah. This wasn't a fleeting vision or a ghostly apparition. Jesus was physically present, walking, talking, eating with his disciples. This event transformed the lives of his followers. Those who had once been filled with fear were now bold, unstoppable messengers of his teachings. The resurrection gave them, and gives us, the hope of new life and the promise of eternity with God. It's a story that continues to resonate and inspire millions of people around the world today. These 5 events weren't random occurrences. They were orchestrated moments, filled with deep meaning, each one echoing the divine plan that was unfolding. The tearing of the veil, the earthquake and the open tombs, the declaration of the centurion, the loving act of Joseph of Arimathea, and finally, the resurrection, they form a powerful narrative that goes beyond history. They speak of love, sacrifice, and victory over death. They reveal that through Jesus, there's hope, there's new life, and there's a pathway to a relationship with God. We may live in a world full of challenges, but the events surrounding Jesus' death and resurrection remind us that there is always hope and redemption. If this story moved you, I encourage you to take the time to reflect on its meaning. The life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ are more than just historical events, they're an invitation to each of us to draw closer to God. If you'd like to learn more about the significance of these events or explore other stories from the Bible, be sure to subscribe to our channel. And if this video inspired you, please give it a thumbs up, share it with friends, and let us know in the comments what aspect of Jesus' story impacts you the most. Let's continue this journey of faith together. Thank you for watching, and may the message of hope, love, and redemption stay with you always.